Eric Eggers, haven't talked to him in a while. Too long. Co-host of the Drill Down podcast with Peter Schweizer. Also, another great podcast he's doing with Susan Crabtree. He's all over the place. Great associate of Peter Schweizer. Welcome back, Eric. How are you?
Greg, I'm jealous. Enjoy the time of being at least one of the top two smartest people in your home with a child that's 6. I have an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a soon-to-be 13-year-old, and I can assure you your place in the intellectual stratosphere is sure to descend. At least mine has. Maybe you're a much better father than me, but enjoy this time. It's very sweet.
Well, I can't let them know any of that. I have to create the illusion that I am top dog. How are you, Eric? Eric, have you gotten a good look at these documents that President Trump put out the other night?
I have. I've gotten a look at the documents. I was fortunate to kind of be on the early end of a briefing before they made this presentation. And more importantly, I heard you call into a podcast we both like, and I think offer a little bit of a gentle rebuke to your friend Mark Halperin because he should have spent a little bit more time on it on his program on Friday. And I would say, as interesting and as newsworthy as Donald Trump's presentation was on Thursday night, I think the presentation by DHS Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen in terms of the statistics, the number of illegal immigrants they found registered to vote in only 4 different states, and more importantly, the juxtaposition of how the intelligence community responded to Chinese hacking in our country in 2020 versus what the Biden administration did specifically to the Chinese hacking in another country in 2024 is a massively unreported story. And so it's a credit to you and your programs you won't talk about it.
Well, thank you very much. And I do love that two-way podcast. But I got to tell you, it's not just, dominant media. Conservative media, and I got friends over there at Fox, but I was not surprised, actually, because I've seen them do this before. Fox News Sunday, their signature show, did not address these documents. I think Hannity and Bret Baier, I don't know what they did. I'm pretty sure it was nothing or next to nothing. Conservative media often doesn't want to do the work. Forget how they feel about President Trump, and a lot of them are conflicted about him. Why do you think they're not pursuing this? I know dominant media, but what about conservative media?
If I had to guess, Greg, I think it's because of the lawyers, and I think that they all still are, they got a legal department that was on the wrong end of some decisions in the aftermath of 2020. So anything that raises questions about the validity or veracity of the 2020 election, and specifically data, and did some of these machines get hacked or whatever, I mean, I think that's what they're reacting to. But I got to tell you, we're actually going to do, Peter Schweizer and I are doing our podcast tomorrow on this very topic, and it's interesting that no one wants to talk about it now because 8 years ago that was not the case. I actually remember they had a hackathon, this kind of confab of people. They bring people together to see if they could hack election machines. And in 2018 in Florida, an 11-year-old hacked into the equivalent of Florida's election system in 10 minutes, and it was national news. NPR and PBS did a big story about it. 2 years later, in 2020, the headline from NPR, cyber experts warn of vulnerabilities facing 2020 election machines. And then even the Soros-funded Brennan Center did a whole release in 2018 about how vulnerable our machines were and our data was. So the fact that China, and a number of other countries who clearly want and who've done it before, they did it in England in 2024, and the elections chief there just came out in the fall and said this set us back 3 years. So, I mean, these are real things. It's not some insignificant thing. And so, the fact that our intelligence community knew that China was doing this, ironically, China was able to acquire data that leftist-run blue states refuse to give the Department of Justice today. That's the headline. Everyone should be talking about it, but as far as why do conservative media not want to talk about it, I think they're a little gun-shy still because of certain lawsuit settlements.
Well, there are certain things, though, that it's A-OK and has nothing to do with litigation. I mean, you make this a story about the intelligence agencies, and we can see them arm wrestling behind the scenes. The bureaucracy does not want to put in the preference that China has for Joe Biden. And these debates and they want to keep that information from President Trump. We're massaging the presidential daily brief. They're boasting about it. This, this is still a free country. Kinda, and we're allowed to question our intelligence agencies and the integrity. So I would hope that they would find their mojo and realize, who they are and where they are, and that these are valid, worthy questions to pursue, and you're not going to get in trouble for it. let me ask you the following. Yes, you mentioned the data breach, China, buying or getting all that information, 220 million voter files. Now, one pushback I've heard on that is that, well, they could have bought that. That's commercially available. Now, I don't know if that's true, but my first response would be, you can buy nitric acid as well. You can buy things to make a bomb. And that's why law enforcement is very kind of, wary of purchases of certain kinds of things. But what do you know about whether or not China could have purchased this stuff, or do they hack to get it?
So first off, each state is different, and I actually had several phone calls today because I'm concerned about that same thought, and that's why I think, so number one, I don't believe it's true universally. Some states you could purchase the information, commercially, but some states you absolutely cannot, which is, by the way, why the Department of Justice is actively suing a number of states to get that data. So that, to me, is the headline. In fact, I was just looking at a letter that the Department of Homeland Security sent to New Jersey, and they said, we have identified 19,000 people whose names, birthday, and addresses match known non-citizens in our databases. We'd like you to run them through our system. We'd like you to kind of audit this and verify this and turn over your information. A number of states, Minnesota, Oregon, Washington, California, have refused to turn this information over. So if it was so easily obtainable, then why is Harmeet Dillon and the Department of Justice having to sue American governors and American secretaries of state to get the data? So to me, it's not true. It's a decentralized system. You have 50 laboratories of democracy. Each state has different rules about what they'll turn over. Some stuff is publicly available, but a lot of information, more specific details, are not. And so that actually is one of the cruel ironies about this, is that these blue states will turn over to the Soros-funded database known as ERIC, ironically, the information, but they won't give it to the federal government, who just wants to do this audit. So, I don't believe that's true, and I think that's one of the points that the Trump administration should be making more rigorously.
I think also anything car-related, license plate numbers and license, on your licenses, the code, they're not commercially available under any circumstances, and it looks like a lot of that stuff was shared. I also don't like the grumbling about President Trump. Oh, he should have done it this way. He should have done it that way. I notice that people get very, very, especially conservatives, very snobby when it comes to messaging. DC in general, like, oh, the messaging is all wrong. The messaging is all wrong. Like, who cares? The message is the important part. I mean, how it was done. Do you know what I mean? It seems like most of the political dialogue in America is about messaging and who did. Anybody can have an opinion on messaging. There's no degree in messaging. You know what I mean? I can't stand all this messaging. And forget the messaging. Just get your head into the documents and see what's there. And it's amazing. Forgive me, but the messaging thing bothers me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think you hear a lot of the commentary about it being like, well, it was hard to follow. Okay, well, whose fault is that? I mean, whether it was laid out in a challenging way, you're either saying, I mean, yeah, maybe they could have presented it a different way, but you're just basically saying you're not smart enough to identify the real story here. And so, absolutely. So it's a kind of a lazy way. It's like when you're in a college English class being asked about a book you didn't read. You're like, well, it reminds me of this other book, you know. So I do. I think I think it's meat on the bones. You've got John Solomon, you've got other people that have gone in there, and you've got this information. They're trying to find out what to declassify and what to release to the American people. And I just think it's like this is the first and what I think will be a number of steps. But to me, Greg, the fact that Homeland Security, and this is something that he gave a press conference about this Friday, but this has been an ongoing thing they've been doing for over a month now. They've put some very smart people in this office, my understanding is, and they're taking this very seriously, and they're leveraging the power of the purse, and they're telling states, listen, you will perform audits after the fact to make sure that the number of ballots cast actually match up with the number of votes that were counted, or we're not going to give you these grants. So and you're going to run your voter rolls through the DHS citizenship database to make sure, as they're flagging New Jersey, they're saying we find 19,000 people we think are on your voter rolls with illegal immigrants. And listen, people are going to criticize them. Well, you haven't proven they've actually voted yet. If nothing else, I think America should be, we can be frustrated about having passed the Save America Act and all that stuff. But when you have the head of the Homeland Security giving a press conference saying, we are going to, if you have anybody, if you register a non-citizen to vote, or if you're a non-citizen, you actually cast a ballot, we're going to go after it, we're going to look at it, we're taking it seriously, and we're going to prosecute to the full extent of the law. That's unprecedented. You know what I mean? That hasn't happened before at the federal level. And if nothing else, that will be a deterrent for all these socialist activist groups out there trying to register people on Skid Row and funnel all these extra ballots they're collecting through their ballot harvesting groups. I think that's a step. They're trying to figure out what they can actually get done before the election, and I think that's a good first step, and it's a warning shot, and I think there's more coming.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, do me a favor, Carlos, take this Face the Nation thing from the top, all right? You're about to hear Chris Krebs, who was the CISA director back in 2020, a very suspect guy in my opinion. He's asked on the Face the Nation show about this presentation by the president and the documents. Go ahead and hit that for us, Carlos, would you please?
And for more on election security, we're joined now by CBS News contributors David Becker and Chris Krebs. Good to have you both here, because I want to download from both of you what we should be understanding about this past week. Chris, the president of the United States, Donald Trump, appointed you to run the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, that's CISA, that Senator Warner was just talking about, to help states protect their election infrastructure during 2020. That was a secure election, you said. The president fired you for saying that. This past Thursday, he again insisted it was not secure. Did you hear anything that changes your assessment?
Not at all. In fact, I would say that it further bolsters my confidence in the security of the 2020 election between what has been released, disclosed last week, and all the information and the results of court challenges and other things in the intervening 6 years. 6 years. But it's also, I think, a good opportunity to reflect on the good work that the millions of hundreds of thousands, if not million or more, election workers that helped execute the 2020 election, the tens of thousands of federal government employees that worked to protect the 2020 election. That was not something that came together a couple weeks before 2020. That was years in the making. And that work was solid.
All right, stop for a second. Mullins. This guy is dirty. This guy is dirty. And that was a clue right there, Eric. Tens of thousands of federal workers were involved in the elections. I can understand, maybe an office of this or that or the other thing, but I think he's dirty, and I think he's running scared right now.
Well, he's, by the way, not alone. There's a number of officials, both at the federal level, even in a state like Georgia, I'm sad to say, when you preside over something where a lot of questionable activity happens, you have two choices. And I think Chris Krebs and some of the officials in Georgia took the option of saying, no, the work we did is, as he said, solid. Because the alternative is to say, no, we messed up, we didn't secure the election, and fraud or a significant data breach or significant vulnerability was exploited on my watch. And they're never going to say that. So they have to double down. But let me just read you something. This came out in March of 2018. It said in two critical areas, the Brennan Center, which, by the way, is like this liberal funded, it gets money from Soros. They're always talking about how safe and secure, like a voter fraud doesn't happen, all this stuff. They said in two critical areas, the Brennan Center finds the country's been remarkably slow to act in replacing voting machines most vulnerable to hacking and mandating post-election audits that would allow the country to detect and recover from successful cyber attacks against those machines. And by the way, so this is some people, leftist groups, sounding the alarm 2 years before this happens. And, of course, if you're defending the 2020 election as being the safest and most secure thing, as we get kind of years later in the fog of COVID and all the crazy, ridiculous things that we allowed to happen then are lifted, that's not an island I want to be on. I think the number of people that are still there, good for CBS for finding one of the few people that still wants to defend that work. But I think most Americans can kind of look back and say, wait a minute, we cast the most ballots ever in the least secure way possible, and we now know foreign governments who wanted to do us harm, foreign governments who, of course, would have much preferred to do business with Joe Biden than Donald Trump, had access to these data rolls. You got machines that could be hacked by an 11-year-old in 10 minutes, and you got a guy with a, white-collar haircut on national TV trying to defend it and say, no, everything was good. No one believes it. Doesn't pass the smell test. And I think more and more information is going to come out to further prove just how kind of nonsensical and silly some of those claims continue to be.
Yeah, and nonsensical and silly. We know everything that can be hacked. And then, oh my gosh, a voting system. If you say that, lawyer up, you're in trouble. I mean, come on, give me a break.
No, one of these reports in 2018 said that the election systems were using software like Windows from 15 years ago. They said I wouldn't use this on like a hot dog vending machine. That's a real quote from an NPR article. I'm saying it.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's amazing, and it was all there. And they were ready to use it if the election was leaning the other way. Hey, Eric Eggers, we thank you very much. Tell Peter Schweitzer we say hello. That's going to be an awesome podcast. We can get it wherever we get our podcasts, right? The Drill Down?
Wherever you can get your podcast, or you can find out every episode and some other media clips at thedrilldown.com.